So thank you for appearing before the Commission today. The Commission has requested you to appear in relation to the case of Mr. Auguste. Yes. Mr. Auguste has filed a complaint alleging that he was forced into exile and that his property was unlawfully repossessed. At the time of these events, you held the position of curator of vacant estates, and it appears from the court record that you petitioned the court to have all rights and property of Daniel Auguste vested in you as the curator of vacant estates, and that petition was granted on 8th of February 1991. The property was subsequently repossessed by SHDC, the Seychelles Housing Development Corporation, without objection by you on 7th of May 1991, and then sold to his sister-in-law in 1997. The Commission would be grateful to hear any recollection you have with respect to this particular complaint, but also more generally, it would appreciate receiving information from you about your role, as curator of vacant estates, your obligations and your duties in that position. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you. So, firstly, I don't know Mr. Daniel Auguste. I've never met him. I've had no connections with him as far as I know. We are talking about events which happened in 1991. Curator of vacant estate comes under the umbrella of Registrar General, which means 10 different hats. And the curatel side was a minor part, I have to say, of that duty. As the curator in this case, from what I understand, I carried out a mechanical transaction based on a file received and instructions received. But I am informed by Mr. Jean-Claude Dauphin, who is coming next as a witness, that this was a very simple case of a person not paying their housing loan and having their house repossessed. So I really wonder about this commission and the filtration process before you actually investigate such matters.
I should tell you, we have a person files a complaint before us. This complaint is also tied to unlawful detention. So it's a package. Yeah, so it's a package. So we do have a filtering process. We determine the admissibility of complaints. The bar is low. It is a low bar at that stage. We determine it's prima facie admissible, and then we begin some investigations. This complaint has a number of components, as I just said. Thank you.
Understood. So anyway, it seems as if just 5 minutes of discussion out here with Mr. Jean-Claude Dauphin, I understand what this case is about. Before that, I had no idea. I don't know Mr. Auguste. I've never seen any documents. Usually when people go to court, they have a little session with a lawyer to see what they have to face. So I don't know what is being discussed here today, really, as such. But I will give you some kind of idea, maybe, of the curatel procedures. From what I remember, I haven't looked at them for a long time. So essentially, there was this policy of acquisition of land, and it was a general thing to where there were absentees, minister would acquire a property, and if the person was absent from Seychelles and could not be traced, then the curator was taken and put into the shoes of the absentee. They were very strict. Sorry.
Who would look for the person?
Who would look for the person?
Yeah,
The curator would normally write a letter to the last known address and wait for a response. And it's the same law today. You can look up the Curatel Act and you would see exactly what the process is. Yeah. So the main policy and action decisions were being taken elsewhere. Curator was just put there as some kind of something to aim at, to place the land in, or the house, whatever. And I don't know what motives people had behind for what actions they were doing. We just receive a file cover with little notes about what action to take. I am advised in this particular case, the man defaulted on his loan. But there were other cases where property was taken for different motives. Often there was compensation paid, and this is placed into a special account. Curator does not handle any money. There is, I believe, a curator's accounts book or something along those lines.
so that would be to give the person the balance once the money owed has been taken from the sale, or?
What happens is the government was the purchaser normally, so they would make some payment and that money would be put into some kind of curatel account, I believe. Everything was done by the technicians in the land registry. Curator is too busy dealing with stamp duty and land transfers and things.
Who established the value of the land?
Well, in those days, the Land Acquisition Act was quite ruthless. And they also had their own employee, I believe, in the Ministry of Land Use and Habitat. I think it was an Indian valuer. And he has appeared in several cases. If there was no development on a property, it was classed as zero value under the Land Acquisition Act, I believe. No compensation was considered. If there was a development, the valuer would look at it and decide. And this system was put in place about 3 registrars before me to make this whole process look legitimate.
Sir Rouillon, good morning. Correct me, please. You said mechanical transactions from file and instruction received. Am I correct?
Yes.
What it means exactly?
What do you mean exactly? It means that
Mechanical transactions.
yes, curator writes to the person, they don't respond. Curator makes an application to court for a vesting order. Vesting order is put into the curator, vesting him with the property of the absentee. In this case, the absentee was the holder of an SHDC loan, which happened to be put in his name, I understand. And then SHDC applies to court. They have to have someone to aim at, so they aim at the curator, who is the actual owner at that time. And then the process is complete. Curator does not object because those are the instructions on the file.
So the instructions were from where or from whom?
They're from the Ministry of Land Use and Habitat. or from SHDC, whatever. I mean, there's a whole pile of people all discussing in these file covers, and I'm surprised you guys don't have that access to those things, because there are much more serious cases where it could be considered theft.
In the case of Mr. August, he
Yes.
said the last address known.
On the file,
Did you
yes.
try it out in the file?
The last known address on file, basically.
Investigation to know.
Remember what the provisions of the law are applied, but there's been an acquisition, basically.
Does the curator have any say in determining the value of the land?
No,
Can the curator question the value of the land?
possibly. But in those days, I don't really know how much of a positive role the curator was playing. I mean, I worked for government for 10 years when I was from prosecutor to registrar general, and they gave me 4 days to leave that office. So anything which was questioned, you had consequences. And I think Mr. Dove will come and say similar things.
This commission that, as Registrar General,
Yes.
you were given 4 days to vacate your office?
Well, I will tell you the mechanism they did. When they found troublesome people, they put them on minimum 2 or 3 year contracts. They took them off the government scheme, put them onto these contracts, which they could terminate. And they terminated my contract in January '94 with 4 days to leave my office after 10 years of government service. Because I was pulling in too many people for annual returns, which included parastatals, which included some very high-ranking people here, including senior lawyers and government people, because I was putting them in the magistrate's court for failure to file annual returns.
I mean, if I heard you right, you said 3 registrars before you to make the whole process look legitimate. Did I hear that right?
Well, from the files I seem to remember, there was a senior lawyer who was already involved in the process, and then my predecessor, they didn't even think that this post was that serious. She was a technician who was elevated to registrar. She did not have any legal training. So it was not, in the past, the history of the registrar is basically a rubber stamping office. It's not until the person started doing stamp duties to value, land registration duties to focus on actual plots of land which had absolute title. Before that, the registrar was almost a rubber stamping office. You just went there, it was like a post office. And under the civil code, the registrar has no right to refuse a transcription under the old land system.
I mean, I guess one of the issues with the curator is he just has to write a letter to the last known address, and a lot of these people that lost their land were forced into exile after being victimized and placed into prison. Their last known address was not in the Seychelles, so it's sort of, that really played against them. I think that that's all you need to do as a curator.
I'd like to look at the file to actually see where we wrote or what we did. I don't have access to it.
Yeah, I mean, we did try to get access to files, but from SHDC, PMU, from in relation
Not
to a
PMU.
number of PMU, from in relation
Not
to a number of
PMU,
cases.
PMC.
PMC. PMU's the police mobile unit, right? Yeah. But without any success to date. But we are trying to get access to the files, and we'll continue to try to get access to them, so that we can get a fuller understanding of what happened. But it seems to me just to have to write to the last address when someone's, in exile, or made an agreement with somebody, to let them know what's going on, and that agreement doesn't always work out. But
No, the act is quite ancient, I believe, Curatel Act, and it doesn't seem as if it concerns a lot of our acts at the moment are completely obsolete. Rental and other business associations and things like that, they're not seen as a priority. It seems they're very ancient old English acts.
To come back to this concept of writing to the last known address of the person, somebody who has defaulted would normally be somebody who, in those days, in the circumstances of the time, would be somebody who had left the country and gone into exile. So a letter is sent to him at his address in Seychelles. He is in exile. He never gets the letter. He is considered a defaulter. His property is foreclosed and sold to somebody else. So it's a situation where that person is bound to lose out. Would you agree
From
with
my recollection, a lot of the people we were writing to were not Seychelles addresses. A lot of them were not Seychelles addresses, because especially we had the people down there at Aslamouche area, where they bought little plots then from the Swiss, and they bought this through the Times newspaper. I remember that much more than I remember a case of Mr. Auguste. And all of these people had bought from Thailand, from Germany, and all kinds of places. They bought these pieces of land. That's how the government decided to introduce the sanction law, I believe, because these people had bought all of these plots of land down in the south without anybody's permission. It was just private sales. So we were writing a lot to those people, because people were looking at those properties. Private people, not just government is involved with the curatel. Private people were saying, well, there's this empty plot of land next to me, who owns it? So we write to the person who purchased it, and quite often people wrote back. So a lot of the work that Curatel was doing was with actual buyers and sellers in a way, because people had now grown old and the plan they had for this investment was now obsolete. They couldn't make it here because of their age. So this one here is a kind of, that's why I don't remember this one, because it's a one-off. And the whole issue of exiles is that there were very few of these type of cases from what I remember, in terms of actually exile people who I focus from what I wasn't here during the coup stuff. I was in UK. I only came back here in 1983. So I was just basically a technician for government. I knew nothing about the 1976, 1977 business, although I joined the opposition as soon as I started finding things out, including standing first UO candidate for Bellhomme as registrar. So as soon as I found out, I started on that route.
hence you lost your job.
Well, I lost my job for speaking out a bit. And actually, it was the best thing that happened to me, because Mr. René gave me my notary's license very quickly after, and I never looked back.
You mentioned properties which had been acquired by foreigners.
Yes.
Were these properties acquired back by the government after that?
Government didn't seem to be too interested in this. It was a Swiss consul, I believe, that set up the whole scheme. I think it's down at Aslamouche where they've got all these little squares everywhere. And people were buying through the Times newspaper. So especially government didn't really want to kind of spoil their image too much, I believe, by starting to go in for those ones. But and a lot of it was done by private people who identified plots. And Dr. Tenzin, sorry, I shouldn't be mentioning names. He wrote to the owner, and they did a transaction purchase. Sorry, I shouldn't be mentioning names. So.
Many of you making accusations.
No. It was a bona fide purchase for value.
As a curator, is there an obligation on the curator to obtain the best possible value for the property which has been vested to him?
I'd have to have a look at the law, the exact wording of the law on that, really. I'm not really sure. But I would say that the curator, becoming the owner, gets that obligation automatically.
And is there an obligation for the property to be advertised and sold by public auction?
In what sense, basically? Because the curator is just there as an owner. So somebody would be having to make an application for that property to be sold, and I don't really know whether there's a mechanism under the Immovable Property Transfer Restrictions Act.
In the exercise of due diligence, wouldn't it have been a prudent procedure for a curator to follow?
No,
that
because the curator is the owner. I'm not supposed to do anything with that person's property. Unless I get an application from someone which, as I say, possibly in this one here, was for repossession of an SHDC house. I never took any decisions to sell property under my control to anyone.
I'm not referring to you personally.
Yes. No, I don't think anyone, I don't think even my predecessors did.
Okay. So
Even now I have somebody who has been promised by government for a property, and curator has been vested, and she's not transferring to the person, even with a court order. I understand there is a case at the moment.
But under the case of Mr. Auguste,
Yes.
it wasn't a sale to SHDC. It was a repossession
Yes.
of a property which had been mortgaged
Okay.
as guarantee for a loan.
Okay. And this was happening with quite a few of the local people here as well. People who defaulted, they suffered the same consequences. The house would be given to some other more, according to the instructions, another more needy person, because that was the policy of the Rene government, basically, to supply housing to people in need and who were prepared to take their obligation seriously.
You said earlier that you got files with little notes on them. These little notes, were they very specific, saying allocate this parcel to so and so?
Well, these government files, you get these little front covers bits with all kinds of different writing, colored writing, and then when you get the red writing, that means it's come from State House. But these were just procedural, and the SHDC and the Ministry of Land, Use and Habitat, they used to have extensive, because it passes through so many different people, and then the final person would say approved or something like that, and then that starts the process or continues the process.
Thank you, Mr. Rouillon.
Sorry, I'm just trying to understand the role, really, even the necessity of having a curator to me, it's quite embarrassing to have a file with instructions already made. So what's the point to have a curator, please?
Well, what was the point of going through the whole system? Basically, when people are taking a portion of land and they're allocating a zero value on it under that Land Acquisition Act that was passed. So the whole process of taking was just stealing. But in this case, from what instructions I have, Mr. Dauphin has explained to me the background to this case. And he will give you a much better explanation if we're just dealing with this case, that the man defaulted. And there was quite a bit of discussion between them. It wasn't as if he kind of was taken by surprise. He was a poor exile somewhere. There were discussions. But other people have suffered, I know that.
Good morning, Mr. Rouillon. I just have one little question on the role of the curator. Can any time a curator object a repossession order, no? Or
What do
they
you
have to
what
go?
do you mean by repossession?
Like if you represent the owner, and an order has come that you're going to repossess the property, can the curator say no? I object the decision.
If there is a justification, the application for repossession could be contested in the court.
But that wouldn't be an independent determination the curator would come up with. He would be
Definitely.
instructed to take that position, or he could himself go,
Well,
I'm going to object.
in those days, I used to take decisions, and I saw the consequences in the end.
You lost your job.
Yes.
I mean, theoretically, yes.
Yes.
In practice, not without consequences.
Except the whole thing about the whole SHDC thing, I think it was a very powerful idea politically of giving people an accommodation, and people were very much in need. It wasn't like today where we have flats everywhere. And if people defaulted, there was a long queue for other people in need. And that was played up by the powers that be.
In the case of Mr. August, I referred to your statement earlier. The curator normally act in place of the absentee. Am I right?
Yes.
But he didn't even know the absentee.
No.
So for me, it's quite, I don't understand. You have been given the power to look for the absentee, the last known address, you don't know him, and decisions are taken.
Yes. What happens is that we are a small country. We were filled up with complicated English laws and procedures. The Curatel Act is one of the less looked at laws of the country. I believe it's possibly from English law. In the same way as a lot of our laws here, Evidence Act, associations, it's looked at as a low priority. And the post itself, for it to be lumped under 10 hats of a registrar, shows that it was not serious. It was a rubber stamping, just about, you could say. It's never been taken seriously because it hasn't changed since 1991 or even before my time until now. More stringent changes could be made to that law if people took it seriously. But there are a lot of other priority laws as well, which people are being, you could say, victimized in a way, because things like assimilating business premises with renting of houses. That law has not changed since the Kingdom Come time, and it's affecting a lot of cases. There's a lot of laws in this country which need to be upgraded, and possibly that's one of them. And also you had a one-party parliament for so many years where people just raised their hands to the legislation which assisted its cause, and everybody raised their hands whenever a bill was tabled. No discussion, just raising their hands, law is passed. And every other law of any significance to do with people's rights and things like that, completely ignored. It's been a long battle from that time until the last time I was here. Actually, I was with Mr. Paul Chow for the constitutional debates, which were not televised. I was the legal advisor to the Democratic Party.
They're taped, and we're going to watch them, right?
The first one, or the TV circus?
I'm not sure. Whatever's most interesting.
Well, the first one was kept completely quiet. That was the walkout one. The first one was the walkout one, which nobody knows about.
So, thank you very much for coming today and enlightening us a bit about the creator of vacant estates. We appreciate it very much. Unless you've got anything you want to add, you're free to go.
No,
Yeah.
I can see you're doing a job here, and there's a lot of comments people are making, positives and negatives, and also it seems as if we're branching into people spilling out their private stories, as well as trying to be more focused on finding some solutions. So there's you've got a big job ahead of you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so, yeah. We are due to adjourn now, so we will adjourn and we will return at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Like the Vice Chair said, we will adjourn until 11. All rise.
the next witness, please.
Mr. Jean-Claude Dauphin.
Repeat after me. I,
I,
Jean-Claude Dauphin,
Jean-Claude Dauphin,
shall swear to tell the truth,
shall swear to tell the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
So help me
So
God.
help me God.
Please have a seat.
Thank you, Mr. Dauphin. The Commission is grateful to you for answering its request that you appear as a witness today. The Commission called you because in a sworn statement before the Commission, Mr. Auguste states that you were the housing officer at the time of the events he complains about, and he says that he's spoken to you several times about him losing his property and that you might be able to provide some information to the Commission about the circumstances surrounding the repossession and then resale of his property. So I'll hand over to you any information you can give. Thank you.
Yes, I know Mr. Auguste. He's a very good I've known him for a long time, a very good friend of mine. And yes, he took a loan from SHDC, but there are two things here. HSTC was parastatal. They did their things themselves. And I was in the ministry as a PS, but as a PS, the minister would approve who gets a loan, then I'll just write to them. Well, I usually recommend to the minister, yes or no. I write back to them and say, a loan has been approved to Mr. So-and-so. In the case of Mr. Auguste, I remember, the loan, when he left Seychelles, we were friendly. We spoke a couple of times. He told me he had to go. So I said, but I'm leaving my sister-in-law in my house. I remember that very well. I told him, I said, Daniel, are you sure what you're doing? He told me, yes. Okay. The loan for the first few months was paid properly. Then she stopped paying the loan. Then SHDC sent me the file and asked me, what do we do? I said, well, you act according to the law. The law says if you don't pay your loan, it's repossessed. You do the necessary. So they did the necessary procedures and repossessed Mr. Daniel's house. Then they came to me and said, but what do we do? Do we leave the lady in the house? I said, you must be joking. She hasn't paid. Do you think he will kick her out? A couple of days later, I got a phone call from Mr. Wene, the president. You leave the girl in the house. And from that day on, I never looked at that file, never bothered myself in that case again.
If I understand correctly, Mr. Auguste left. He told you he was leaving, and he was leaving the property with Miss Wawo.
Well, I can't remember the name, but the
sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And she did not pay the loan, and so the house was repossessed.
Yeah.
So there was no arrears when he left on the house?
I cannot remember properly. It could well be, but as I said, it was SHTC who was managing everything, the accounts. I was on the other side as a PS. I only sent file there when a loan had been approved or if there was something that I cannot.
And then Mr. Rene called you and said she is to have the house.
Well, she stays in the house, yeah.
She stays in the house.
And from that day on, I didn't bother myself again. It was a phone call.
Right. Okay.
And these days, you couldn't say anything about it because I remember one day he phoned me and told me to give a house. I said, sir, you send me a memo or phone the minister. Jean-Claude is an order. So
So he would phone you and give you direct instructions which you had to carry out.
Yeah.
Because if you didn't, what would happen if you didn't? What if you said, no, I'm not doing that?
What? Madam, let me tell, maybe all of you here don't know. I was in charge of housing. It was another corporation. They were giving loans to people who had money at the time. There were HSTC for other people, poorer people, and then for. So when that company closed down, I had been offered a job in finance. It was Mr. Webber was there, been offered a job in finance. Anyway, maybe at times I talk a little bit too much. I had said things. And then no one told me, "No, Claude, what have you done with it?" I said, "Why?" "But you can't get that job." I said, "You must be joking." I stayed home for 1 month with that job, just because I told the truth, what had happened.
Like suspended or?
No, I'd finished with one company. I was to work in a job in finance straight away. It had not been appointed yet, but I didn't get the job
Okay.
for 1 month. So I said, after 1 month, I was called and given that job because I told the truth. That's all. I said,
So can I just, we've heard from a lot of people that, they were fearful during the time of, doing anything that was against what the government wanted. So would you say that you were fearful of doing anything? What consequences would there be if you...
I'm from Australia, no?
I'm from Australia.
Okay. I've been there. I wish I'd gone there when I was younger. I got my permit. I still regret it. Anyway, you couldn't do anything these days. In those days, either you act or the door would be somehow. The law, everything was in the book there. A phone call or anything, you had to abide to have a phone call. I remember twice, once I asked for, please send me, first time I call the minister and tell him, because there was a minister above me, but okay, it's an order, all right, okay, I give the house. And the second time, when again he told me to give the house to somebody, I said, either you send me a memo or something. He said, okay, it's an order. You just shut your trap, that's that.
When you say the laws were in the book, does that mean that they were not applied? It was just something written in a book?
I don't know. You as a Shira like me, you know how many times I've gone the other way? You know it. I don't have to tell you. I remember I went, there was something wrong. So I went to tell him. I said, "Sir, I showed him all the documents and everything." "Okay, leave it with me, Jean-Claude." Instead of the guy who did wrong, I was punished in his place. So.
To come back to Mr. Auguste, I know you have a lot of abilities in the financial field. Now, Mr. Auguste got a letter in April 87, I think it was, telling him that he was 30,000 odd rupees in arrears. From what he said and what you have said, even after he had left the country, his sister-in-law paid whatever was to be paid for a few months before she stopped.
I think so. As I said, because the records were kept by SHDC. It was what we call a parastatal organization. They had their own. We were on the ministry side, so I really don't. But before they took any action about reposting the phone, I said, "Well, you just act according to the law. That's all. What the law says. I can't leave you all those."
To come back to my point, if he was 30,000 rupees in arrears and his repayment had been 800 rupees a month. Or 900. Even at 900, it would have been just over 10,000 rupees a year.
Well, simple calculation, yes.
Yes, so it would have been arrears for 3 years.
Yeah.
But he left Seychelles in 86, in September 86. If he had been paying whilst he was here, forget about when he was gone, from September 86 at 900 rupees a month to April 87, I cannot see how it comes to 30,000 rupees.
Yeah, simple calculation, yes. But I can't, I don't know. Really, as I say, they were parastatal, they were administering the financial side, we didn't know our side. We didn't.
But you would admit that is a strange figure to come up with.
Arithmetically, yes.
Thank you.
So, is it true to say that Mr. Auguste lost his property because his sister-in-law failed to uphold her part of the agreement he had made with her, which was she can live in the house and pay my mortgage?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, and we do have a letter on our file where she was actually asked to vacate the house when it was repossessed, and then she sent a letter back saying, I have no intention of vacating. I've spent money on this property and I need a house of my own. And from there, she seems to have been able to stay there. I don't know if I can never find that letter. That letter. Number 4? Number 3 and number 4. Okay. That's number 3. Oh, okay, okay. Oh, yeah. No, that's the arrears.
She was contacted. She was sent a letter by Mrs. Buisson, Mrs. Anne Buisson, from the President's office on the 11th of August 1987, asking her to look for alternative housing because SHDC had already earmarked this property for a needy family. But then she replied.
She replied and basically said, after going through our daily newspaper Nation, dated 8th of May and 16th of May, to which the minister explained carefully on the above matter. So this gave me more confidence, and I went through some expenses renovating. And then she says, I do not intend to move out from the present premises as I am in such need of a place too. And that according to the Nation, the minister advised that, tenants would not be made to move out of properties that they were renting, but be allowed to stay there. And it seems after that there's no other correspondence, but maybe you've explained that you had a call from the president at the time saying that she shall have the house.
Yep. Simple.
Now, let's go back to, you were in the housing ministry. You were PS in, that ministry was the parent ministry of SHDC.
Yeah.
The policies for SHDC would be set by that ministry.
Yeah.
Could you enlighten us on what the policy was regarding the disposal of foreclosed properties by SHDC?
Well, HSDC had its own board as well. So the board had a say in things. But, okay, ready? Yeah, but the policy at the time was you don't pay your house, the house was repossessed.
And once it was repossessed, how was it disposed of after that?
Well, the thing is, if they'll bring you to the rent board and kick you out
Okay, they kick you out.
and pass it to somebody in need and give it to somebody in
How do they choose? Was there a policy set?
need. Yeah, what is, there again, it was the district will send a letter who needed a house, and I'll put a recommendation to the minister in charge and approve and send back to SHTC.
Were there criteria like first come, first serve, or if you have 5 children, you get preference over?
It was in people in need, and the what do you call it? The district, those in charge of the dam, they had a say as well.
The DAs.
Yeah, I don't think they were called DAs at the time. I cannot remember the name, but they had a say. They sent a recommendation, and if we looked at it and agreed with it, just send it to the minister for approval.
But then the person whose house had been repossessed, did they then become a person in need that could, they would have nowhere to live,
Yeah.
so they would be
Yeah.
a person in need.
But the thing is, after repossessing, the person who lost the house, he could claim compensation. And I mean compensation. Value the house and pay him the difference between the house and the loan, the valuation and the loan.
So, if the house was sold for more than the person owed SHDC, that balance,
The person would, if he claimed, he would get that difference.
and if he did not claim,
Too bad. It stays in HSTC's account.
okay.
Was there a time limit by which you had to claim that money, or?
I cannot remember
No,
my name exactly.
okay.
No. But I know there is a law which gives you, I think, 5 years. The law applied to everybody else. What called? I've forgotten the name of that law. But
And would the dispossessed person have a right to a say in the value of the house?
well, he could get a valuer for evaluation of the property himself. He could pay somebody to do.
How would the evaluation be done? Then, I mean, what was the process? Was there a process for?
Well, I'm not sure. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure how the valuation is done. Because I remember my property at Parlin also was acquired. And I got only 15,000 rupees for it. How they did it. Even though I asked questions, I could never get an answer, so I just kept quiet. So there was a way I think they worked on it. There's a procedure. I'm not. It was done by lands office at the time, not SHDC or housing, because we had no say in land, only housing.
So we can look forward to getting a claim from you.
No, I just kept quiet. No, I didn't rest. That's when I got where I'm staying at Northeast Point. I told them, sorry, you've taken my, it was, you know Parlin, I'm from Parlin. It was my grandmother's property. Before she died, she had a will and she divided it, and my mother got her share. So I'm the only child, I got my mother's part. And they were going to take the lot. I said, my property, I want a property on Parlin. I come from Parlin. And they said, all right, we'll take half of it and give it. I got the other half. Then, at the time, there was a law that says you could have only one property, an house. I had a house at Kensi, and I said, I don't like the place because it's close to the road, there's a lot of noise. I've seen a place I noticed someone out, you can't. I said, you've taken my land at Parlin, we'll just exchange. I'll give you the difference. That's when I got the property at Notice Point. Yeah, I've gone through a lot of, I'm not coming with any claims or anything, but I've gone through a lot of,
You were never asked to give evidence in any court case regarding this matter?
Mr. August's matter? No. As far as I can remember, no. No.
Mr. Duffy, good morning.
Morning, sir.
He said that the SSDC used to have a board of directors.
Yes.
Am I correct? So what was the relationship between the board and the ministry?
Well, the ministry will give the guidelines. And also, those people in need would be in a house. The board was more or less control HSTC, work inside, finance and things like that. When it comes to policy, the minister would allocate a house to the needy. It had to be approved by him. They sent to me, I put a recommendation, it approved and then sent back. I even as a PS, I didn't have the power to do that, to approve a house to anybody.
When you say you approved, does it mean you could have rejected it? If you didn't approve it, do you have a choice, approving or rejecting?
Not at all. If the person in charge of that district had recommended and said that, and it had to go. Even though I wouldn't like it, but they knew their district better than we do. Even though at times I'd argument with them because we evaluate the case as well. So, but they say they know things better than we do.
So let's say you just endorsed, you didn't approve.
Yes, but it had to go. Said, okay, I approve for the minister. No, send for the minister's approval.
When you say SHTC was there to provide housing for the needy, were the needy considered needy depending on their financial situation, on their lack of housing?
The needy was considered, it was at a place was that if somebody had a number of children, they didn't have a place to go, their finance will come last, government finance. They'll get a house. You can't stay on the road.
So the first priority were children.
Yeah, the necessity. You needed a house, you had a lot of children, you get it.
But do you know whether the lady who got the house in this case had any children at the time?
I cannot remember. I don't know that lady at all, sort of. Huh?
I understand it's a long time ago, 40 years ago. Or
Especially I forget things these days, so start forgetting.
go on.
You don't happen to know where we could find the SHDC files, do you?
I don't know whether it's sent to the archives or what they've done with it, or they've destroyed it. I really don't know. I've never asked, but I don't know.
I mean, we have been trying because we have a lot of cases, you know, where they're sort of a figure in it, you know, and their files would be interesting, but we haven't been able to locate them, unfortunately.
The director or CEO of the SHDC at the time?
Oh, it's very... When I left, when I moved out from HSTC to ministry, Mr. Enista, I think, came after me. Or Mr. Dingwell, I cannot remember. Those two, either Mr. Enista or Mr. Dingwell, Perrin Dingwell. But I remember Perrin was there for some time.
And who was the Minister of Lands at the time?
Mr. O'Doul was. After Mr. O'Doul, it was Mr. Jumeau, and then Mr. Enista.
I think it was the curator of Vecate Estate to say they got a file with a little sticker on it. Those stickers, were they kept or were they just at the end of it when the files were archived? Do you know how they dealt with it?
No, I don't remember about these things.
Would that would those instructions form an integral part of the file?
I cannot remember. I've never seen that thing about the caretaker. It was probably communicated direct with SHDC, or because as I said, they had taken. He was not paying. They were acting on not paying. We repossess or whatever it is.
Mr. Duffy, when Mr. August left Seychelles for the exile, did you get the opportunity to talk to him after that?
No, when he was, I cannot remember. When he was in exile, no. I can't remember talking to him, no. Before, yes. Before he left.
There was a statement made earlier that after he had been informed that he was in arrears, that there were negotiations between you and him.
Well, usually people in arrears will come and see me and ask for, a delay or to pay. Let's say you are paying 500, we'll pay 700. Yes, we discussed things like that and agreed. And then I'll send a recommendation to the minister for his approval and then send it back to SHDC. Either reduction in, but rarely a reduction. Usually the person will come and say, instead of paying 500 rupees, I'll pay 700 or 600. So okay, we change to clear arrears.
And did that happen in the case of Mr. Auguste?
I cannot remember. I cannot remember really.
But if someone was in 30,000 rupees of arrears, do you think you would remember that? I mean, it's like he hasn't paid for 3 years, supposedly. I mean, wouldn't that be unusual, someone not paying for 3 years until they get a letter saying you haven't paid?
Yeah, usually, he should have been informed long before. Are you in arrears? You've got to... Well, maybe SHTC at the time didn't know his address. So maybe the letter was handed over to the person in the house and he was never informed. Because at times what we did is to give the letter to the person in the house.
Except that in this case, it was only like 6 months after he'd left Seychelles that that letter is supposed to have gone out. He left in September 86, and that letter says he has the 30,000 in arrears at the end of April of 87.
It was May 1987.
I don't know. Could well be.
Can't
Not
explain
remember,
it.
no.
Monsieur Auguste, before leaving Seychelles, Monsieur Duffy, he came to see you in which capacity? In your position or as a friend?
Well, I'd usually come as a friend, we'll discuss, but if there's something to do with his case, we discuss that as well. Because as I told you, I've known him for a long time, we are friends.
So, did you know where he was after he left? Did you maintain contact or?
No,
No.
we didn't.
But you knew where he was.
I knew he went to England, but I never got anything from him.
I mean, would it have been a problem for you to contact someone in exile? If you're still here, I mean, could people here, like, keep contact with those that are left? I'm just trying to get a really understanding of the climate. You know, people left behind, people gone out. Could you?
Not really, madam.
No.
But I know for sure my phone was tapped at home. It was a couple of times when I was speaking hard, and I swore that that person was, but my phone was.
Was that normal practice to tap people's phones that were working for the government? Yeah?
Well, if you had a big mouth at times, yes, it was. They will tap your phone, or if they knew you were friendly with somebody, they'll listen to your conversation. My home phone was.
So if your phone was tapped, it was probably a good idea not to call him in England.
Yeah, you're right, or him to call me. But even with people locally calling me, they could listen and.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dauphin. We don't have any further questions for you. I think we appreciate very much your evidence today. It's helped us a lot. Is there anything you would like to add at all?
No.
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 Thank you very much. You're free. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I think we will adjourn now and have a long lunch and resume at 1 p.m. where we will actually start hearing evidence of a complainant in another case, case 006, Paul Michaud, and evidence in relation to case 001, 002, and 003. So we'll adjourn now and we'll be back at 1 p.m. Thank you.